This book here is the most dangerous book ever written, at least according to the Cabal. It's called The Heart of the Reptile. And when I read this book years ago, it fundamentally changed my view of what's happening in our world today. And many people have experienced the same thing. The author is an African shaman named Credo Vusamazulu Mutwa, a traditional healer, a diviner, a medicine man who spent time in the bush, communing with spirits and seeing things unseen by ordinary human eyes. Now, let me say right away, some people are going to hear this and automatically dismiss what I'm about to share. They will think that I've gone off the deep end. But those people, if they're honest, have already dismissed everything that does and fit their worldview without ever considering that what they're missing could be the most important thing in the universe. Because what Mutwa writes about, he says he learned directly from spirit, a spirit he calls the Great Intelligence. And it seems to me that if you don't believe him, you don't really believe anything unless it comes from a so-called credible source. And I would challenge anyone watching to find a more credible source than this one. Mutwa claims that the true history of humanity has been deliberately erased and hidden from us. And the reason why? Because the powers that be know that once we understand that history, we become free. The illusion crumbles and the dream ends. So today I want to share with you what Mutwa learned about the true nature of reality, where we come from, who's behind our predicament, and how we can take back our power. In 1978, Mutwa met a holy man named Penkali, a member of an ancient order of priests and keepers of esoteric knowledge who had lived among the Zulus in South Africa for centuries. Penkali told Mutwa about a race of beings who came down from the sky in vehicles of fire and settled in the mountains. These beings were neither human nor animal. They were tall, slender, with gray skin like the color of ashes, almond-shaped eyes, and narrow heads. They did not procreate like other animals. Instead, they created humans in their own image, except for the fact that they made the humans taller, broader-shouldered, and with larger brains. Then they turned the humans loose to multiply and spread across the earth. But this was merely the beginning of their plan. It seems that these reptilian sky gods wanted to make themselves gods in all but name. They used their advanced knowledge to divide humans into nations and kingdoms, inventing languages and writing systems, then gave certain men positions of authority over others, turning human against human, distracting us from our true nature and purpose. Their strategy was simple: divide and conquer. Through religion, they further divided us into warring tribes and sects, then set up priestcraft to exploit the common people, telling them that the gods demanded sacrifices and tithes. In effect, they rigged the game so that they would always win. We became like ants, working industriously to build the nests of the rich and powerful who sat in the shadows, pulling the strings. The reptilians, who Mutwa calls the Chitauri, live in caves and abandoned mine workings beneath the earth. And while they may seem like mere fantasy, there are cultures around the world who have stories of such beings. There are the Dogon, for example, whose Nommo came down from the sky and mated with human women, giving birth to kings and chiefs who ruled over the people. Or the Hopi, whose Kachinas were supernatural beings who came to earth from another world to teach humans culture and agriculture in exchange for their labor. Even the biblical story of the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels and human women, fits right in. The Sumerians even have a whole pantheon of Anunnaki gods who came down from heaven and ruled over humanity. And the Egyptians had their fallen gods too, the Elohim, who mated with human women and sired kings and pharaohs. And the list goes on. But perhaps even more interesting than the stories themselves is the fact that these cultures are separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, yet their myths and legends are strikingly similar. If you think about it, this is hardly a coincidence. And if we look closely at these stories, we see the same pattern repeating again and again. Tall, fair-skinned gods from the skies, both benevolent and terrifying, who introduce new technologies and ways of life and take slaves or children in exchange for teaching agriculture and building temples or cities. Then they leave and return later to test the people and destroy those who didn't do as they were told. Now in his book, Mutwa makes the connection explicit. He says that these sky gods, whatever their names, are all part of the same plan. And he shows how this plan is laid out in the Bible too. In Genesis, we read that God created man in his own image, which obviously sounds nice until you realize that in the original Hebrew, the word image is slim, meaning shadow or reflection. In other words, we are the God's reflection, the embodiment of their will on earth. And this means that we were made to be like them, obedient, submissive, and ultimately disposable. The Bible itself hints at this when it tells the story of the Nephilim, the offspring of the gods and human women. These giants, it says, were wicked and violent, and God destroyed them all except for Noah and his family. In other words, the gods killed most of the humans they had made in their image because they were unobedient enough. This raises a disturbing question. Are we next? And here's where things get really interesting. You see, throughout history, there have always been people who have refused to bow the knee to the gods. People like Enoch, who walked with God and wasn't found worthy of being taken in the great flood. Or the righteous Lot, who was warned about the impending destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, but whose wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. Or Job, who remained steadfast in his righteousness despite losing everything. These people understood that the gods, whatever form they took, were only one thing, a challenge to the human spirit. And they knew that true freedom lay not in obedience, but in independence, not in bowing before the gods, but in standing on their own 2 feet. They saw through the facade and realized that the gods were nothing but reflections of their own inner darkness, and so they refused to worship them. Instead, they chose to walk their own path, to face the darkness and forge their own destiny. Now, if you're not careful, this message could easily be misinterpreted. Don't misunderstand it. Obedience, servitude, and submission are indeed evils that must be rejected. But independence and self-reliance, while highly valued, are not the ultimate goals either. The true goal is something far greater and more profound than that. It's spiritual realization, the realization that we are divine, that we are gods ourselves. When we understand this, we no longer need to obey any external authority because we become our own authority. We discover the eternal truth that we are free. This, in essence, is the wisdom contained in the pages of Mutwa's book, a wisdom that challenges everything we've been taught to believe about the nature of reality. He opens our eyes to the existence of beings with advanced technology who have influenced human affairs since the dawn of time. Beings who have deliberately manipulated us into accepting systems of belief that keep us divided and subservient. Systems of belief that have led to wars, poverty, and untold suffering. So what can we do about this? How can we break free from the grip of these unseen forces? First, we must awaken to the truth. We must realize that the only chains that bind us are the ones we forge ourselves. That the only limits that hold us back are the ones we create in our own minds. Second, we must reclaim our attention. We must learn to tune out the constant barrage of programming that bombards us from every direction, that shapes our thoughts and controls our actions. Finally, we must remember who we truly are. We are not shadows or reflections of any other being. We are not puppets dancing on strings. We are creators. We are co-creators of our own destiny. And when we remember this, we reclaim our power. And when enough of us reclaim our power, the game is over, the illusion fades, and the dream ends. As Mutwa wrote, the war has never been for territory or wealth, but for the human soul. But we are not powerless. We were never powerless, and the controller's greatest fear is this very realization. So let us embrace it together, for it is our birthright and our salvation.